I want to talk to you about democracy and freedom. These are the two concepts that most of us feel are at the core of our definition of America. And you're hearing from all sides that this election will determine whether your freedoms and the democratic rule of the land will end. Yet, polls show that this year's election turnout could be very low, especially with young voters. It bothers me to hear that, but I'm not surprised. Voters have been told for decades that this next election is the most important of your life. And after each election, whether your candidate won or lost, your life didn't change much. You went on struggling to pay your bills, raising your family, furthering your education, hoping that the American dream was real, that you would someday reap the benefits promised by our democracy. It didn't seem that America was much different after each election, but a slow-moving train was rolling over us. Our household bills rose, raising a family became more difficult, and today, a college education means most of our children will enter adulthood with crippling debt unimaginable to earlier generations. Most 18-year-olds today do not envision owning a home. The American dream began taking longer to achieve with each generation until it began looking like it might not be possible any longer for a middle-class working family. That's where we are today. It happened so slowly that, as it was happening, we couldn't directly relate it to a particular event or a particular policy. But it turns out all those elections were very important. We just couldn't see it at the time. During those times, our government took some steps forward and several steps backward under the leadership of both parties. But what we're left with today is a nation that subsidizes the wealthy while arguing over whether 2 or 3 jobs should be sufficient for the rest of us to pay our bills. Does this demonstrate the failure of our system? Should we, as many Republicans believe, tear all this down and start over? I say absolutely not. What this outcome demonstrates is that the people in charge dropped the ball, and the people in charge are us. When only 66% of eligible voters cast a vote, it's barely a working democracy. In Indiana in 2020, only 42% of voters under 30 showed up at the polls. It's amazing that the people whose lives would be most affected by an election would choose not to vote. When the results of this non-engagement show up in 20 years, you probably won't like them. Voting is the greatest exercise of our democracy, and too many of us expect to have the benefits of democracy without participating in it. Now, many Republicans will immediately say, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. I guess they didn't listen to Founding Father James Madison when he said, in a democracy, the people meet and exercise the government in person. In a republic, they assemble and administer it by their representatives and agents. Because we choose our representatives, we are a representative democracy. The reason we are not a direct democracy is that many of our wise founders recognized that in a direct democracy, the opposing minority would lose its voice in deciding America's direction. They felt that with some representatives taking on the voice of minority views, their ideas would be heard in our political debates. It was a forward-thinking insight, a true genius. Where we failed is that we've chosen the wrong representatives. Take a look at Congress. Do they represent you? If you're not a millionaire, a doctor, a lawyer, or a career politician, no, they don't. They're nothing like you. Their lives are nothing like yours. In every cycle, it becomes harder for someone who is like you to even get on a ballot. But one party loves the fact that you don't vote. In 2023, 28 new laws to restrict voting rights were enacted in 15 states controlled by Republican legislators, many of them targeting young voters. Idaho no longer allows in-state student IDs to be used as legal voting identification. Meanwhile, in democratically controlled states, 33 new laws were enacted to expand voting rights. One party seeks more democracy, the other less. The new breed of conservatism that has overtaken the Republican Party believes that democracy should be taken out back and put out of its misery. They are the new autocratic party that loves the shoe-pounding rhetoric of fear and hate. They admire dictators. They believe the president should be all-powerful and above the law, like Putin is in Russia. They believe their religion should be the law of the land, like in Iran. They believe that their freedom is threatened by your freedom and have no problem taking yours away if it serves them. And through a strategic, populist message, they're engaging you to help them take power. Some of you are starting to see that, including many patriotic Republicans who are resigning from Congress in droves and leaving the party. The previous Republican vice president will not even endorse the current Republican presidential nominee. I'm not here to shut down their views. That would be un-American. But my sense of duty tells me I need to point out exactly what they are. This wouldn't be the first time that a populist, charismatic, turned a democracy into a dictatorship by means of a democratic election. The current state of America also makes me reflect heavily on my own party. Obviously, many of you feel we've let you down. We have historically been the party of the working class, the party of America's underdogs. Yet I see working class voters turning to a party opposed to democracy, whose leader is a sexual predator and fraudulent tax evader under indictment and trial for insurrection. A man who has expressed his admiration for dictators and his desire to be a dictator. We obviously have not done right by you, and I'm here to change that. I promise to listen to you, and I will represent you even if you don't vote for me. Truthfully, I think the major problem is one I've already stated. Congress does not look like you. The people you've elected can't represent you because they haven't walked in your shoes. America is not a nation of extremists, but extremists are now running Congress. This is why we have to stop electing the kinds of people we have in the past. This is why we have to make it easier for Americans like you and me to get on the ballot. This is why we have to change Congress. Republicans will tell you that people who talk like me are your enemy. I'm not your enemy. I look at you and I see my reflection. We have the same struggles, the same goals, the same love of family, community, and country, even if we disagree about some issues. But I have to be the one to remind you that in a strong, working democracy, no one is happy all the time. You win some, you lose some. When you lose, you regroup and you contemplate why you lost. You don't shout fraud and claim democratic elections are rigged. You don't shut down your opponent's message. You make your message stronger. When you see a protest or a strike, a political debate, or a heated discussion between neighbors, it's not something to be horrified or fearful of. It's a cause for celebration because it means our American system is working. When Tucker Carlson tells you how Moscow is so much better than American cities, keep in mind that in Russia, there is no opposition to those in power. The opposition is simply eliminated. The fact is, American voters are very smart. Their opinions are generally years ahead of congressional action. A majority of Americans wanted us out of Vietnam long before the government acted. A majority of Americans supported equal rights for minorities years before the Equal Rights Act. A majority supported women's rights and gay marriage before they were ever spoken about on Capitol Hill. Today, a majority of Americans support a national opt-in healthcare system, a more progressive tax system that forces the wealthy to pay their fair share, rent control, and affordable working-class housing, clean air, and water for all, and for women to have the same control over her health as any man does. Perhaps most importantly, 74% of Americans say we have to protect the rights of those who don't agree with us. None of these things will happen as quickly as many of us would like, but the American people always get their way eventually. As long as our democracy stands, that's the key. And you hold that key. Please use it. Please vote.